High above the Indonesian archipelago, a silent threat awaited. A volcanic ash cloud, invisible to radar, spewed from the eruption of Mount Galunggung. This cloud, composed of fine particles of volcanic glass and rock, posed a severe risk to any aircraft flying through it. The stage was set for a terrifying nightmare, testing the limits of human skill and courage. As the aircraft unknowingly entered the ash cloud, the engines began to fail, one by one, plunging the plane into a perilous situation. This is the story of Flight 009, a tale of how a routine flight transformed into a fight for survival. It is a testament to the resilience and bravery of the crew and passengers who faced unimaginable odds and emerged with a story that would be told for generations. Stay tuned. Flight 009, also known by its call sign Speedbird 9, was a routine British Airways service from London Heathrow to Auckland, New Zealand, with several stopovers including Bombay, Madras, Kuala Lumpur, Perth, and Melbourne. The aircraft for this leg of the journey was a Boeing 747-236B, registration G-BDXH, also named City of Edinburgh, with a maximum takeoff weight of 387,000 kilograms and a maximum range of 12,325 kilometers. This specific aircraft was a technological marvel of its time. The aircraft being used was a 3-year-old Boeing 747-200, powered by 4 Rolls-Royce RB211-524D engines, renowned for their efficiency and reliability. These engines were the heart of the aircraft, providing the necessary thrusts to carry the aircraft over vast distances and various weather conditions. However, what happened on this fateful night would test both the machine and its crew in unimaginable ways. June 24th, 1982. A date that would soon be etched into the annals of aviation history. British Airways Flight 009, a Boeing 747, embarked on what was supposed to be a routine flight from London to Auckland. The aircraft, a marvel of engineering, was designed to handle long-haul flights with ease. On board, 247 passengers settled in for a long journey, unaware they were about to become part of aviation history. Families, business travelers, and adventurers alike, all looking forward to their destinations, blissfully ignorant of the impending danger. The airliner was under the command of Captain Eric H.J. Moody, with Senior First Officer Roger Greaves and Senior Flight Engineer Barry Townley Freeman on the flight deck. It operated with the call sign Speedbird 9. As the captain and pilot in command, Eric Moody bore the ultimate responsibility for the safety of the aircraft and everyone on board. His calm and measured response to the crisis, including his now famous announcement to the passengers, was a testament to his extensive experience. Captain Moody had accumulated 13,000 flight hours over a distinguished career, much of which involved flying the Boeing 747, a type he knew intimately. Captain Eric Moody had started his career way before as a glider pilot, and that's going to turn out to be quite important during this incident. His ability to remain composed under extreme pressure was instrumental in guiding the crew and passengers through the ordeal. Assisting him, the senior first officer, Roger Greaves, was the co-pilot of Flight 009. With 7,000 flight hours under his belt, Greaves was a highly competent and experienced aviator. His role during the incident was crucial in assisting the captain with the complex decision-making and technical procedures required to manage the emergency. He played a key part in the crew's efforts to restart the engines by following emergency checklists, coordinating with the flight engineer, and helping to maintain the aircraft's glide path during the critical moments of engine failure. With them, Barry Townley Freeman, the flight engineer, had the most flight hours among the crew, with an impressive 15,000 hours. His expertise was vital in diagnosing the problems with the engines and coordinating the restart attempts. The flight engineer's role in a Boeing 747 cockpit involves monitoring the aircraft's complex systems, including the engines, fuel, and electrical systems, and adjusting as necessary. Townley Freeman's deep understanding of the aircraft's mechanics allowed him to work closely with the captain and co-pilot to manage the situation, including overseeing the windmilling procedure that ultimately led to the successful restart of the engines. Little did they know, high above the Indonesian archipelago, a silent threat awaited. A volcanic ash cloud, invisible to radar, spewed from the eruption of Mount Galunggung. This cloud, composed of fine particles of volcanic glass and rock, posed a severe risk to any aircraft flying through it. The stage was set for a terrifying nightmare, testing the limits of human skill and courage. As the aircraft unknowingly entered the ash cloud, the engines began to fail one by one, plunging the plane into a perilous situation. It appeared that the weather would be fairly pleasant as the pilots assembled their pre-flight briefing materials and began examining their flight plan during the pre-flight preparation. Although there were just a few light clouds, there were no turbulence or unfavorable weather forecasts in the briefing, and it appeared that the journey to Perth would take roughly 5 hours. And when we arrived at the airport, the plane was arriving a bit later. The crew walked to their aircraft, boarded the passengers, taxied out, and took off normally. After deciding that Captain Eric Moody would be piloting for the first leg, they began rising south over the Indian Ocean. The flight was smooth and pleasant in the beginning. Up to their cruise altitude of 37,000 feet, the crew was cleared. After completing that task, they can relax in their chairs and recover for a little while. Approximately 8:15 p.m. local time was now being served to them. They then connected to Airways 69, which led them onto a path that passed close to Jakarta's southern border. However, the crew was unaware that a volcano named Galunggung had been erupting continuously for the past 3 months beneath them on the island of Java. Additionally, the volcano ejected large amounts of ash and lava into the atmosphere during that eruption. Right now, at this moment, there was a lack of information regarding the potential impact of volcanic ash on airplane engines. Therefore, no pilots or airlines received any indication that there was an active volcano nearby. Captain Moody had to use the restroom after he had finished his supper. Therefore, he did a final scan of the weather radar before giving First Officer Roger the controls, and the weather radar showed nothing at all. He then stood up, gave the first officer the controls, and left the cockpit. Later, he discovered that the crew restroom was occupied. Instead, he went down the stairs to the first-class lounge to search for a restroom. Once there, he struck up a conversation with a flight attendant when a member of the other cabin staff who was still up in the crew quarters quickly called him back up to the flight deck. As British Airways Flight 009 approached Indonesian airspace, Mount Galunggung, an active volcano on the island of Java, had been erupting for months. The volcano had been spewing massive amounts of ash into the atmosphere, creating a deadly cloud that was largely invisible to the naked eye, especially at night. At approximately 8:40 p.m. Jakarta time, Flight 009 was flying over the Indian Ocean, south of Java. The crew noticed a strange phenomenon. An eerie, luminous glow on the horizon. They were unaware that they had entered a cloud of volcanic ash, which was about to wreak havoc on the aircraft's 4 engines. As the captain enters the cockpit, he saw a display that he had never seen. Over the windshields, there was what appeared to be St. Elmo's fire everywhere. The phenomenon known as St. Elmo's fire is an electrical one that typically occurs when we fly near electrically charged particles, such as near thunderstorms or anywhere where there appears to be a moving pattern of lightning across the windshield. As of right now, St. Elmo's fire is not hazardous. It's rather lovely, but it does show that you frequently find yourself near thunderstorms. Captain Eric turned around and returned to his chair. The fact that the crew had already turned on the continuous ignition on all 4 engines made him very delighted. As it happened, the weather radar was as clear as it has been minutes before he had left the cockpit. The aircraft was in a thin cloud at the top, so Captain Moody reasoned that there had to be a large conimb, since the crew typically observes moisture at the summits of tall conimbs or other. In the winter, you can have fog and St. Elmo's fire when you are on the ground with the diffuser running and the engines turned up. The crew noticed a curious stroboscopic appearance that, when combined with the spinning fan blade, gave the impression that the fan blades were slowly reversing. This bluish glow was coming from both the leading edges of the wings and the engines themselves. The pilots had never seen anything like this before, and as they turned to face their windscreen once more, they saw that the fire from St. Elmo had been replaced by what appeared to be trace fire. When suddenly, the passengers noted a strange phenomenon. The aircraft's exterior began to glow with an eerie blue light, a phenomenon known as St. Elmo's fire, caused by the ionization of the ash particles in the atmosphere. At the same time, a sulfurous smell permeated the cabin. Barry, the flight engineer, yelled, "Engine failure!" Engine 4. The flight engineer's revelation brought the issue to a whole new level, and it was now 8:40 p.m. local time. "All right, engine failure and shutdown checklist, please," said Captain Eric. Barry, the flight engineer, then began to follow that checklist. And that covered things like returning the thrust lever to idle and turning the engine start lever to cut off. In the case of British Airways, it also involved pulling the engine fire handle, that is, aiming the extinguishers, so they would be ready to go in case they were needed, but not actually inserting any into the engine. The situation escalated rapidly when Barry shouted again as soon as the number 4 engine's engine failure shutdown checklist was finished, this time with the words, "Engine failure number 2, 3 has gone, they've all gone." This indicates that the Boeing 747 went from a fully regulated, routine flight to one in which all 4 engines failed at the same time in a matter of minutes. This could turn out to be disastrous, and the flight's crew's performance in recovering will be much influenced by how they manage this coming forward. This announcement startled Captain Moody, who peered down at his engine instrumentation. Within minutes, all 4 of the Boeing 747's engines began to surge and fail. The crew and passengers heard loud bangs, and the engines, one by one, flamed out. In the cockpit, the crew faced the unthinkable. All 4 engines had failed, leaving the enormous aircraft gliding silently in the sky. At 37,000 feet, with no power, the crew was dealing with what every pilot dreads: a complete engine failure. We couldn't believe it. In my entire career, I'd never heard of all 4 engines failing simultaneously. We followed the emergency procedures, but the engines just wouldn't restart. We were gliding, but how long would that last? Captain Moody said. The aircraft began to descend rapidly. The crew immediately declared an emergency and began to prepare for the possibility of a ditch in the ocean. Captain Moody made a calm but chilling announcement to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a small problem. All 4 engines have stopped. We are doing our utmost to get them going again. I trust you are not in too much distress." Despite the grim situation, the crew remained focused and professional. They attempted to restart the engines by descending to a lower altitude, where they hoped the ash would clear and the engines could reignite. As the aircraft descended to about 12,000 feet, something incredible happened. The crew managed to restart the number 4 engine. With 1 engine operational, the crew could stabilize the aircraft's descent. Shortly after, they succeeded in restarting the other 3 engines. The sense of relief among the crew and passengers was palpable. The aircraft had dropped over 25,000 feet during the incident, but they were no longer in a free fall. However, the danger wasn't over yet. The volcanic ash had caused significant damage to the engines. As the crew attempted to climb to a safe altitude, the engines began to overheat again. The crew was forced to throttle back to avoid further damage, and they knew they couldn't stay airborne indefinitely. With limited power, the crew made the decision to divert to Jakarta. Navigating through an ash-filled sky with damaged engines was no easy task. The windscreen was severely scratched by the ash, reducing visibility to almost zero. The crew relied on their instruments and communication with Jakarta Air Traffic Control to guide them to a safe landing. Despite the odds, the crew successfully brought the aircraft into a descent toward Jakarta's Halim Perdana Kusuma International Airport. With visibility still poor, they relied heavily on their instruments to line up for the approach. As the aircraft descended below 4,000 feet, they finally broke through the ash cloud, giving them visual confirmation of the runway. In a remarkable display of skill and teamwork, the crew brought the aircraft down safely. The landing was smooth, and the passengers and crew erupted in cheers and applause. Against all odds, Flight 009 had made it safely to the ground. The relief was overwhelming, and it wasn't long before the story of this miraculous flight spread around the world. Flight 009 was a wake-up call for the industry. It led to improved ash detection systems and better communication between airlines and volcanic observatories. The bravery and professionalism of the crew set a new standard for emergency response in aviation. Captain Eric Moody, First Officer Roger Greaves, and Flight Engineer Barry Townley Freeman are celebrated as heroes. And rightly so. Their actions saved 263 lives that night, turning what could have been a tragic disaster into a story of miraculous survival.